tried to kill it before it was even built. But in 1969, Pontiac fired back with the loudest middle finger Detroit ever made. Some cars are born legends. Others become legends because someone tried to kill them. In 1969, Pontiac built a muscle car so bold, so defiant, that GM's own boardroom wanted it dead before it ever reached the showroom floor. This is the story of the GTO Judge, the underground rebel that corporate America couldn't erase no matter how hard they tried. Detroit in the late 1960s was a battleground. Every manufacturer was locked in an arms race of horsepower, cubic inches, and quarter-mile times. But while Ford had their Mustangs and Chrysler had their Hemis, General Motors had a problem: their own rules. The corporate brass had decreed that no intermediate-sized car could carry an engine larger than 400 cubic inches. It was a safety measure, they said, a responsible decision for changing times. But to the engineers and designers at Pontiac, it felt like a death sentence for everything they'd been building since 1964. That year, 1964, Pontiac had done something revolutionary. They dropped a massive 389 cubic inch V8 into the lightweight Tempest body and called it the GTO. It was named after the Ferrari 250 GTO, the Gran Turismo Omologato, and it was pure audacity. The car wasn't supposed to exist according to GM's rulebook, but Pontiac's chief engineer John DeLorean and his team found a loophole. They listed the big engine as an option package, not a standard feature. Corporate looked the other way, and the muscle car era exploded into full color. By 1968, the GTO had become Pontiac's golden child. Sales were strong, the brand was hot, and young buyers were lining up at dealerships. But the times were changing fast. Insurance companies were raising rates on high-performance cars. Safety advocates were calling muscle cars death traps. And inside GM headquarters, nervous executives were watching the cultural tide turn against everything the GTO represented. They wanted Pontiac to tone it down, play it safe, maybe even kill the performance image altogether. Pontiac's response was the Judge, and it was the automotive equivalent of turning up the volume when someone asked you to be quiet. The Judge was born from a marketing meeting that felt more like a creative jam session. Jim Wangers, Pontiac's legendary ad man, was brainstorming with the team about how to inject new energy into the GTO line. Someone mentioned the Laugh-In television show, the wildly popular comedy program that was dominating ratings in 1968. On that show, comedian Flip Wilson played a character called the Judge, who would point at people and declare, "Here come the Judge." It was a cultural catchphrase, and it was everywhere. The name stuck immediately. The Judge would be the ultimate GTO, louder, wilder, and more visually aggressive than anything Pontiac had ever built. It would be painted in colors that scream from across a parking lot. It would wear graphics and stripes that made subtlety impossible. And it would come standard with the Ram Air 3 engine, a 400 cubic inch monster that pushed every limit GM's rulebook would allow. This wasn't a car designed to please the boardroom. This was a car designed to ignite the street. When the first sketches and proposals reached GM's executive offices, the reaction was swift and brutal. GM's executives hated it instantly. Too wild, too loud, and far too proud of everything they were trying to bury. The marketing was too youth-oriented. The name itself was borrowed from a TV show without permission, which opened up legal questions. And worst of all, the Judge represented everything GM was trying to move away from: raw power, aggressive styling, and an image that attracted exactly the kind of young, ticket-collecting drivers that insurance companies hated. Corporate wanted the Judge killed before it ever saw daylight, but Pontiac had already gone too far. Tooling was underway. Dealers had been teased. The automotive press had caught wind of something big coming. And most importantly, John DeLorean and his team believed in the car with a passion that bordered on defiance. They knew the muscle car era was under attack, and they weren't going to surrender without one final glorious middle finger to the bean counters. So Pontiac did what they'd always done best. They found a way around the rules. The Judge would be introduced as a limited option package, not a standalone model. That meant it could slip through certain approval processes with less scrutiny. The marketing team toned down some of the more outrageous promotional ideas to appease legal concerns. And most cleverly, they positioned the Judge not as a luxury performance car, but as a budget warrior. The base price was $3,313, making it one of the cheapest ways to get into a legitimate muscle car. Corporate couldn't argue with a value proposition, even if they hated everything else about the car. What they didn't realize was that the Judge wasn't just a car, it was a rebellion on four wheels. The 1969 GTO Judge hit showrooms in December of 1968, and it was like nothing else on the road. The standard color was carousel red, a shade so bright and unapologetic that it looked like it was painted with anger. This vivid orange-red hue, similar to what Chevrolet called Hugger Orange, had been rebranded to fit Pontiac's naming scheme, and it became instantly iconic. Wide blue and orange stripes ran along the flanks, and a rear spoiler jutted up from the trunk like a middle finger to aerodynamics and good taste. The Judge decals were bold and cartoonish, featuring a gavel-wielding character that perfectly captured the car's rebellious spirit. This wasn't a car that whispered. This was a car that kicked down your door and demanded attention. Under the hood was the Ram Air 3 engine, a 400 cubic inch V8 that made 366 horsepower. But those numbers were lies and everyone knew it. GM had been underrating their engines for years to keep insurance rates manageable and corporate executives happy. The real output was closer to 400 horsepower, maybe more depending on who built your particular engine on the assembly line. The Ram Air 3 breathed through functional hood scoops that gulped cold air directly into the carburetor. It rumbled through dual exhausts that could wake the dead, and it turned the rear tires into smoke machines at the slightest provocation. For an extra $790, you could upgrade to the Ram Air 4, and that's where things got truly serious. This engine was hand-built, blueprinted, and balanced. It featured round port cylinder heads, a hotter camshaft, and stronger internals. On paper, it was rated at 370 horsepower. In reality, it was pushing somewhere around 430 horses or more in gross horsepower terms. The Ram Air 4 Judge could run the quarter mile in the mid-13-second range with a skilled driver. Car Life magazine clocked one at 13.7 seconds, hitting 104 miles per hour. That put it toe-to-toe with Hemis and Cobra jets, and it did it while looking like a comic book character come to life. The engineering behind the Ram Air 4 was where Pontiac's expertise truly shined through. The round port heads were a masterpiece of design, flowing significantly more air than the standard D-port heads found on lesser engines. Each port was carefully matched and polished by hand, ensuring maximum efficiency. The camshaft featured increased duration and lift, with specifications that pushed the power band higher into the rev range. The valve springs were stiffer to prevent float at high RPM, or revolutions per minute, and the entire rotating assembly was balanced to tolerances typically reserved for racing engines. What made the Ram Air 4 particularly special was the attention to detail that went into each build. These weren't mass-produced engines rolling off an assembly line at full speed. Skilled technicians took their time, measuring clearances, checking compression, and ensuring every component met strict specifications. Legend has it that some engines were even dyno tested before installation, though Pontiac never officially admitted to this practice. The result was an engine that could vary wildly in performance from one car to another, depending on how well the stars aligned during its assembly. Some Ram Air 4 Judges were absolute monsters, capable of breaking into the 12-second range with minimal modifications. Others were merely very fast. It was a lottery that made every car unique. The transmission choices were a 4-speed manual or a 3-speed automatic. Most buyers chose the manual because the Judge was about involvement, about feeling every gear change and hearing the engine scream through the rev range. The Muncie 4-speed was a rock-solid gearbox, borrowed from Chevrolet's parts bin, but more than capable of handling the Judge's torque. The shifter was short and mechanical, with gates that required purpose and commitment. You couldn't lazily slap it into gear. You had to mean it. First gear was good for about 40 miles per hour if you had the courage to wind it out. Second gear took you to 70, third to 95, and fourth was pure overdrive for sustained high-speed cruising, though the Judge's aerodynamics made anything over 110 miles per hour a buffeting, noisy experience. The automatic transmission was the Turbo Hydra-Matic 400, a 3-speed unit that was nearly indestructible. It wasn't as engaging as the manual, but it was consistent and brutally effective at launching the car. Automatics could often post better times at the drag strip because they eliminated driver error and wheel hop. The torque converter would load up, the rear suspension would squat, and the judge would launch like it had been shot from a cannon. For street racing on Friday nights, the automatic was often the smarter choice, even if the manual was more fun. The suspension was stiff, the steering was heavy, and the brakes were adequate at best. This wasn't a refined machine. This was a weapon with license plates. The front suspension used unequal-length A-arms with coil springs, while the rear featured a live axle with leaf springs and trailing arms. It was simple, old-school Detroit engineering that prioritized straight-line acceleration over handling finesse. The judge could corner when pressed, but it wasn't happy about it. The body would lean, the tires would protest, and you always had the sense that the car would rather be pointed straight ahead with the throttle buried, which, to be fair, was exactly what most judge owners wanted to do anyway. The steering was unassisted in base form, though power steering was a popular option. Without power assist, parking lots became upper body workouts, and low-speed maneuvering required genuine effort. But once you were moving, the steering provided feedback and connection that modern cars with their numb electric systems can't match. You felt every imperfection in the road, every little correction, every subtle weight transfer. The judge demanded your full attention, and it rewarded that attention with a driving experience that felt raw and alive. Inside, the judge was surprisingly basic. The seats were vinyl unless you ordered the upgrade. The dashboard was shared with lesser GTOs. There was no luxury pretense here, no leather or wood grain trying to justify a higher price. You got gauges, pedals, and a steering wheel. Everything else was just weight. The judge knew what it was, a straight-line rocket for people who valued speed over comfort. The instrument cluster featured a prominent tachometer, a speedometer that optimistically climbed to 140 miles per hour, and auxiliary gauges for oil pressure, water temperature, and fuel level. The optional rally gauge cluster added more detailed monitoring, including a clock that most owners ignored in favor of watching the tach needle climb. The seats, even in base vinyl form, were surprisingly supportive. They hugged you during hard acceleration and kept you planted during spirited driving. The rear seat was more of a suggestion than actual seating. Adults could fit back there for short trips, but anything longer than 20 minutes became an exercise in discomfort. The judge was a two-person machine that happened to have a back seat for insurance purposes. The automotive press went absolutely wild for it. Magazine reviews praised the judge's performance and laughed at its audacity. Road tests showed it could hang with anything Detroit was building. Car and Driver called it the last of the unrepentant sidewinders. Hot Rod magazine ran quarter-mile tests that embarrassed cars costing twice as much. Motor Trend praised its value proposition, while noting that the styling was certainly not for everyone. And most importantly, the judge captured something intangible. It felt like rebellion. In an era when the government was talking about mandatory safety equipment and emissions controls, the judge was a loud, colorful reminder that fun still mattered. But sales didn't explode the way Pontiac hoped. In 1969, only 6,833 judges were built, 6,725 hardtops, and 108 convertibles. That might sound respectable, but it was a fraction of total GTO production. The problem was complicated. Some buyers thought the judge was too flashy, too cartoonish. They wanted a GTO but didn't want to look like they were driving a billboard. Others felt the base price was misleading because once you added the Ram Air 4 and other must-have options, the judge became expensive quickly. And then there were the insurance companies who saw the judge's name on an application and immediately raised rates through the roof. The insurance situation deserves special attention because it was one of the primary killers of the muscle car era. By 1969, insurance companies had figured out that young men in powerful cars were expensive liabilities. They'd compiled statistics showing that muscle car owners had higher accident rates, more speeding tickets, and more expensive claims. The response was predictable. Premiums skyrocketed. A 21-year-old male trying to insure a judge with the Ram Air 4 could face annual insurance costs that exceeded the car's monthly payment. Some insurance companies simply refused to write policies for certain vehicles. Others would insure them, but at rates so astronomical that only wealthy buyers could afford it. This effectively priced an entire generation out of the muscle car market, no matter how affordable the cars themselves became. Corporate GM, meanwhile, was saying, "We told you so," behind closed doors. The judge wasn't the sales savior Pontiac promised. It was attracting attention, yes, but not necessarily the kind of attention GM wanted as they tried to position themselves as responsible corporate citizens in a changing America. The muscle car backlash was growing louder. Ralph Nader had made automotive safety a national issue with his book Unsafe at Any Speed, which had attacked the Corvair, but cast suspicion on all high-performance vehicles. Young men were dying in high-powered cars, and while the statistics didn't always support the hysteria, perception was becoming reality. And insurance was becoming so expensive that even buyers who could afford a Judge sometimes walked away because they couldn't afford to insure it. Pontiac brought the Judge back for 1970, making some subtle changes. More colors became available, which helped broaden the appeal. Beyond carousel red, buyers could now choose from orbit orange, pepper green, verdoro green, and several other hues that ranged from bold to outrageous. The graphics were toned down slightly, with smaller decals and less cartoonish styling elements. The rear spoiler remained standard, but it could be deleted for buyers who wanted a slightly more understated look. And the Ram Air V engine was briefly considered a 400 cubic inch monster with tunnel port heads and 4-bolt mains that would have made close to 500 horsepower. But GM killed it before it reached production, citing emissions and insurance concerns. The Judge was being neutered, one corporate decision at a time. The 1970 Judge also gained weight, as all cars did that year, thanks to new federal safety requirements. Side impact protection, improved door latches, and other mandated equipment added pounds that the engine had to overcome. The performance was still strong, but the effortless acceleration of the '69 model was becoming more labored. Physics doesn't care about horsepower ratings. It cares about power-to-weight ratios, and that ratio was moving in the wrong direction. The 1971 Judge arrived with even more changes, and none of them were good. The 455 cubic inch engine became optional, which sounds impressive until you realize it was tuned for torque, not horsepower. The compression ratios were dropping to meet new emission standards. Lead was being phased out of gasoline, which meant engines designed to run on high-octane fuel suddenly had to survive on regular unleaded. The performance was still strong by normal standards, but the writing was on the wall. The muscle car era was dying, and corporate America was holding the pillow. The '71 Judge made only 361 horsepower from its biggest engine, and even those numbers were suspect in a world of new SAE net ratings that measured power with all accessories attached and exhaust systems in place. The old gross horsepower numbers had been optimistic fairy tales. The new net numbers were depressing reality checks. A '71 Judge with the 455 could still move quickly, but it felt heavy and lethargic compared to the '69 Ram Air 4. The magic was fading. By 1972, the Judge was gone. Pontiac discontinued it quietly, without fanfare or explanation. Total production across all years was only around 15,000 cars. For a model that was supposed to save the GTO's image, it had been a commercial disappointment. But history had other plans for the Judge. In the years that followed, something strange happened. The Judge went from forgotten oddity to cult legend. Collectors started realizing how rare these cars were, especially the Ram Air 4 versions. The outrageous styling that seemed too much in 1969 now looked like pure courage. The Judge represented the exact moment when Detroit stopped apologizing for building fast cars and just went all in on fun. Consequences be damned. Today, a '69 Judge in good condition with the Ram Air 4 engine can sell for well over $200,000. Pristine examples with low mileage and documented histories have crossed the $300,000 threshold at major auctions. Even base Ram Air 3 models command 6 figures at auction. They've become symbols of defiance, proof that sometimes the best cars are the ones corporate didn't want you to have. The Judge was underground rebellion wrapped in carousel red and packaged as affordable performance. It was Detroit giving the middle finger to safety committees and insurance actuaries, and it was Pontiac's last truly wild moment before the lights went out on the muscle car dream. The Judge also represented something deeper about that era of American automotive history. It was the final stand of engineers and designers who believed cars should be emotional, not just rational. These were people who'd grown up modifying flatheads in their parents' garages, who'd raced on Saturday nights and gone to church on Sunday mornings with grease still under their fingernails. They understood that cars weren't just transportation. They were identity, freedom, and rebellion all rolled into one package. When corporate GM tried to kill the Judge, They were really trying to kill that spirit. They wanted cars to be appliances, safe investments that wouldn't generate lawsuits or congressional hearings. They wanted bland, predictable products that soccer moms and insurance companies would approve of. The Judge was the opposite of everything they wanted, which is exactly why it mattered. The engineering team that built the Judge knew they were fighting a losing battle. Emissions regulations were coming. Safety standards were tightening. The insurance industry was winning the war against performance cars. But they built the Judge anyway, because some things are worth doing even when you know they can't last. The Judge was a statement, a declaration that fun and freedom and raw power still mattered, even if the world was moving on. The street racing culture of the late 60s embraced the Judge with open arms. These were the guys who showed up at stoplight Grand Prix events on Woodward Avenue in Detroit or Van Nuys Boulevard in Los Angeles. They'd line up next to Chevelle and Roadrunners and Cobra Jets, and when the light turned green, it was pure war. The Judge held its own in this world, especially the Ram Air 4 cars that knew how to hook up and launch. Street racers appreciated that the Judge came standard with so much performance equipment. You didn't need to order 100 different options to make it competitive. It was ready to race right off the showroom floor. The sound of a Judge at full throttle became legendary. The Ram air induction created a distinctive howl as air rushed through the hood scoops into the carburetor. The exhaust note was deep and aggressive, punctuated by a lumpy idle from the high-performance camshaft. And when you lifted off the throttle after a hard run, the engine would pop and burble through the exhaust like artillery fire. It was a soundtrack that announced your presence blocks before you arrived and left an impression long after you'd gone. Looking back now, the Judge seems almost quaint compared to modern performance cars. A stock Dodge Challenger Hellcat makes more than 700 horsepower. A new Corvette runs circles around anything from 1969. But those modern cars exist in a world of airbags and traction control and emissions compliance. They're fast, but they're safe. They're powerful, but they're civilized. The Judge was none of those things. It was dangerous, loud, uncomfortable, and gloriously uncompromised. The cultural impact of the Judge extended beyond just performance numbers. It influenced how future generations thought about automotive rebellion. When Pontiac built the Trans Am in the 70s, they were channeling Judge energy. Bold graphics, aggressive performance, and an image that said, "We don't care what you think." The Firebird Trans Am, especially the special edition models with their gold eagles and T-tops, carried forward the Judge's philosophy that cars should be visual statements as much as mechanical ones. When Dodge brought back the Challenger in 2008 with retro styling and Hemi power, they were paying tribute to cars like the Judge that refused to be forgotten. The Judge proved that sometimes the cars that make the least business sense make the most cultural impact. The relationship between Pontiac and corporate GM remained tense throughout the Judge's production run. Every time Pontiac wanted to push the envelope, wilder colors, more power, louder marketing, they had to fight through layers of corporate approval, and every year it got harder. The bean counters were winning, the lawyers were winning, the insurance companies were winning, and slowly, inevitably, the cars became shadows of what they'd been. By the mid-70s, Pontiac was building cars with names like Ventura and Astra. The GTO itself became a sad joke, reduced to an option package on the compact Nova-based Ventura. The spirit that created the Judge was gone, crushed under the weight of federal regulations and corporate risk management. John DeLorean left GM in 1973, frustrated by the bureaucracy and lack of vision. Without champions like him fighting from the inside, the muscle car dream didn't stand a chance. But the Judge refused to stay dead. Throughout the 80s and 90s, as muscle car nostalgia grew, the Judge kept appearing in magazines and at car shows. Collectors who'd bought them new refused to let them fade away. Restoration shops learned how to rebuild Ram Air engines and source correct decals. And slowly, the Judge transformed from forgotten footnote to celebrated legend. Part of what makes the Judge so special today is its authenticity. This wasn't a car built by committee or focus grouped into mediocrity. It was built by people who genuinely love fast cars and were willing to fight their own company to make it happen. That authenticity shows in every detail, from the ridiculous rear spoiler that added zero downforce to the cartoon graphics that corporate executives hated. The Judge didn't care if you liked it or not. It existed on its own terms, which is the rarest kind of existence for any product in corporate America. The Judge also stands as a time capsule of what America was like in 1969. The country was divided over Vietnam. Civil rights protests were reshaping society. Young people were questioning every institution and tradition. The Woodstock Music Festival happened that summer, just months after the Judge hit showrooms. Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. The Beatles released Abbey Road. And into that chaos, Pontiac dropped a bright red muscle car with a cartoon Judge on the side and an engine that could light up the tires at 70 miles per hour. It was absurd. It was perfect. And it was exactly what that moment needed. A reminder that joy and freedom and power still existed, even when the world felt like it was falling apart. The legal battle over the Judge name is its own fascinating story. Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, the TV show that inspired the name, was owned by NBC. Pontiac never got formal permission to use the Judge character or catchphrase. They just went ahead and did it, gambling that NBC wouldn't sue or would be flattered by the association. NBC did send cease and desist letters, but by the time lawyers got involved, the Judge was already in showrooms. Pontiac quietly settled, agreed to limit certain promotional uses, and kept selling the car. It was exactly the kind of ask forgiveness, not permission attitude that corporate America has largely stamped out today. The advertising for the Judge walked a fine line between celebrating its performance and not attracting too much negative attention. Print ads showed the car in action, but avoided explicitly promoting street racing or illegal behavior. One memorable ad campaign featured the tagline, "All rise for the Judge," playing on courtroom imagery while hinting at the car's ability to lift its front wheels during hard acceleration. Another series of ads positioned the Judge as the smart choice for budget-conscious performance enthusiasts, emphasizing its value proposition over pure speed. The marketing team knew they were selling rebellion, but they had to package it carefully enough to get past corporate censors and avoid giving ammunition to safety advocates. The Judge community today is small but passionate. Owners gather at Pontiac-specific shows like the Pontiac Oakland Club International Convention and the Pontiac Nationals. They share restoration tips online through forums and Facebook groups. They debate whether carousel red or midnight green is the better color. They argue about whether the Ram Air 4 is worth the price premium over the Ram Air 3. And they all share a pride in owning something that wasn't supposed to exist, something that corporate America tried to erase but couldn't. Restoration of a Judge is challenging because so many parts are specific to that model and production year. The decals have to be exactly right or the car looks wrong. Reproductions exist, but quality varies wildly, and purists insist on new old stock pieces when possible. The rear spoiler is unique to the Judge and difficult to find in good condition. The stripes follow specific measurements and placement guidelines that were documented in dealer service bulletins. And the Ram Air engines require expert knowledge to rebuild correctly. The round port heads on the Ram Air 4 are particularly tricky. One wrong move during porting or valve work can ruin an irreplaceable piece of history. But for enthusiasts, that challenge is part of the appeal. The Judge demands respect and expertise. It doesn't tolerate shortcuts or compromises, just like it didn't tolerate corporate interference back in '69. The Judge's legacy extends into modern Pontiac history, even though the brand itself is now gone. When GM killed Pontiac in 2010 during the financial crisis and bankruptcy restructuring, it felt like the final chapter in a long, sad story that started when they tried to kill the Judge 40 years earlier. Pontiac had always been GM's rebel division, the place where engineers could push boundaries and take risks. Without that spirit, Pontiac became just another brand selling rebadged Chevrolets and badge-engineered mediocrity. The excitement drained away year by year until nothing remained but a hollow nameplate. The Judge represented what Pontiac could be at its best: bold, fast, and unapologetically American. Without cars like the Judge to define its character, Pontiac had no reason to exist. The final Pontiacs rolled off assembly lines in late 2009, and with them went 83 years of automotive history. There were no Judge tributes in that final lineup, no callbacks to the glory days, just anonymous sedans and crossovers that nobody wanted and fewer people remember. But walk through any classic car show today, and you'll find Judges still turning heads, still firing up their Ram Air engines, still refusing to fade away. Corporate GM succeeded in killing the brand, but they never succeeded in erasing the cars that made Pontiac matter. The GTO Judge wasn't just a muscle car, it was proof that passion and rebellion can survive even in the most corporate environments. It was built by people who refused to let safety committees and insurance actuaries define what cars should be. It was named after a TV character without permission, because someone thought it would be cool. It was painted in colors that made corporate executives cringe and wore graphics that looked like they belonged on a cereal box. And it was powered by engines that were underrated on paper, but over-delivered on the street. Corporate America tried to erase the Judge before it was born, but they failed. The car made it to showrooms, made it into magazines, and made it into automotive history. Today, every Judge that survives is a middle finger to every corporate memo that said it shouldn't exist. Which legend would you take for one last drive? The safe choice that corporate approved, or the underground rebel that had to fight for every mile? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you love stories about the cars that refuse to die, hit subscribe for more tales from the golden age of American horsepower.